So my main focus for today is we're going to be thinking very much around residential care. So in a practical sense, let's going to be honest, we're going to be thinking quite honestly and transparently here, is that you may find your roles and responsibilities as a carer are going to change. And it is really good to be prepared for this. It could be the health of the person you care for is getting worse. Maybe looking after them is taking a toll on you. Then it could be that a move to a residential or care home might be the best option. So we're going to do some considerations around impact on financing. We're also going to be talking about bereavement. So talking about death, the death of a person you care for or looked after, it's a difficult topic, which again may have an impact and effect on your own financial situation as well as other areas of your life. So together we're going to be exploring financial support. So what these changes may mean to any benefits that are being claimed, but I'm also going to just spend a tiny little time at the end just thinking around the importance of looking after yourself. Caring, as you know, involves a range of complex emotions and feelings. These are going to fluctuate or change over time. So we're just going to look a little bit around how you can look after yourself during this process and also how you can look after yourself today as well. Okay, so we're going to start with residential care. So on the Carers UK website, there is a realm of information and guidance and support to help you decide if residential care is the right option for the person you're caring for. But the purpose of today's session, we are going to assume that these decisions have already been made or have happened. Okay, so what we are considering now is if the person you look after currently receives any welfare benefits, how they are going to be affected when they move into a care home. Okay, so there's some information about how to make these decisions available to you, but for today's session, we are assuming that this decision has already happened. So when it comes to welfare benefits and residential and care homes, there are different types of benefits, and depending on the type of benefit that that person is in receipt of, it will depend on what the impact, if any, is going to be. So I'm going to start with disability benefits. So disabilities, as you are probably aware, they are things like personal independence payment, attendance allowance, and disability living allowance. Okay, so that type of benefit. So if the person that you are currently caring for receives one of those benefits, and the decision has been made that they're going to go to a care or residential home, as part of that decision, there will be a funding assessment to see how this provision is going to be paid for. Okay, again, out of the remit of this particular session today, but the outcome of that funding assessment is really important to determine how the welfare benefits of that person will be impacted or affected. So there are different ways that care home funding can happen. So one is that that person is a self-funder. So if somebody is classed as a self-funder, they are paying or funding all of the costs of the care home or residential home themselves. Now, if this is the case, then they will continue to receive their disability benefit payments in full. Okay, so the part for daily living and the part for mobility, if it's appropriate. So those payments will continue in full if the person in the care or residential home is funding that care or residential themselves in full. Okay, but if somebody gets some help with fees from the local council or trust, so this could be partial help, or it could be that they get full help, and following that assessment, then the payment of the care components of disability living allowance or the daily living components of PIP or attendance allowance in full will stop after 28 days. Okay, so for the first 28 days, they will continue. They might actually stop sooner than that if the person has been moved from a hospital in the previous 28 days before they are admitted to the care home. But if they are funded then they will lose the payment after 28 days. Now, the claim doesn't actually end. They are still claiming that benefit, but the contribution from the care component is taken to help fund the support the local council or trust is giving them. Okay, so we're going to come back to that because that can have an impact on benefits further down the line there. They will continue to receive the mobility component of DLA or PIP, but if that person does need support with funding, it is very much reliant on how much of their benefit they get to keep. It's a very complex area, but to keep it simple, because the care is being provided by the care home or the residential home, and the local authority or trust is funding that care, they take the payment of the care part into consideration to help fund the stay. Okay, the mobility part is treated separately. So if they get help with fees from local council or trust, it can impact on the payment of the disability benefit. There's a third category of funding that some of you may be familiar with, and this is the NHS continuing healthcare funding. Okay, and in this case, the disability benefit would stop after 28 days or sooner if they've been in residential care or hospital in 28 days prior to their move to a care home. So again, there can be an impact on the payment of benefits if somebody else is funding the stay in the residential or care home. It's not quite as black and white as that, so it's always worth just seeking advice to make sure how things work. Now, although in theory disability benefits will stop, rather than saying the word stop, maybe if we think of the term suspended, okay, so they're still there, that person's still claiming them, they're still entitled to them, but they may not actually be receiving the physical payment of them while they're in a care home, okay? But this does mean that if they come home, okay, maybe for a weekend, that they will be able to be paid that money again. Okay, it starts to get a little bit complicated now because maybe you're going to have that person home on the Friday, they're going to stay with you Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday, go home, back to the care home again. On the Monday, you would be able to you will be able to claim the disability benefit for those days that they're with you. Okay, so that's something just to be really mindful of because that can actually really impact carer's allowance, for example. So that's actually the benefit that I want us to consider first. So with carer's allowance, if the disability benefit stops, carer's allowance stops because remember, carer's allowance is linked to a payable claim of a disability benefit. But if the care is being self-funded, so they're continuing to get their disability benefit, you can still receive carer's allowance, but you have to be providing care for at least 35 hours a week. If they're in a care home 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, for you to be providing personal care for them for 35 hours a week can be a challenge to demonstrate. But don't forget that if that person is coming home at weekends or coming home once or twice a week, those caring hours will help. And caring, there are a lot of different ways to meet these 35 hours a week. And if this is something that you are going to be facing, you might want to just look a little bit more about what can count for care. Okay. But remember, if somebody isn't self-funding, then their qualifying disability benefit stops after 28 days, then your carer's allowance will stop at the same time. So this is where it really starts to have an impact on who is funding a stay in a residential or care home. Now, of course, a lot of people don't just receive a disability benefit or receive carer's allowance. They also have other benefits that go alongside to make up your household income. These generally tend to be means-tested benefits. So things like housing benefit, council tax support, pension credit. And it could be that actually not only did you have that benefit itself, but you had extra money paid as part of that benefit because you were entitled to carers allowance. So it could have been that you had things like carers premiums, carers additions, or carers elements included in any potential benefit claim. So if your carers allowance stops, you will be able to get some run-on payments, but only for 8 weeks. Okay, so you can continue to get the rest of that additional amount for 8 weeks, or for the rest of your receiving universal credit for the rest of the universal assessment period. Because then after that point in time, you will no longer be treated as a couple in the terms of benefit world. Okay, so then we will be looking at you being assessed as a single claimant, and that might mean that actually any benefit that you receive changes, or maybe you can become entitled to benefits for the first time. So we're going to look a little bit more about how you can access that coming on. But even though you're still married, you're still in a relationship with them, because you're not physically living in the same place in time, then you will be treated as a single claimant. So that can sometimes be a huge change to how your benefits are calculated. Not always in a negative way, I would say. Not always in a negative way. Even if your partner or spouse or who you're caring for is in a care home, you are still a carer, okay? You're still entitled to have a carer's assessment. You still have the right to ask for flexible working. Those entitlements that you have don't change, okay? So just to reassure you that not everything is going to change. Okay, so that's a little bit around residential care and benefits. It is quite complex, so I'm really happy if anyone's got any questions I want to ask you. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about bereavement now. So when it comes to benefits, the death of the person that you may look after can have an effect on your own financial situation. So it's really important that, although, let's be honest, this is probably one of the last things that you want to consider or you want to think about, is actually you do claim what you are entitled to when your circumstances change. Now, you do have a little bit of a breathing space here. It's not a huge amount of time, but there is an 8-week period. So, for example, if you're receiving carer's allowance when the person you care for dies, this will continue for 8 weeks from the Sunday following the death of that person. Okay. Unfortunately, this doesn't always automatically happen. So having someone to support you, or you being able to keep an eye on these things, is really important, because it isn't fair and it isn't right, but sometimes you have to go to the carer's allowance unit to get them to put this back into process. It should happen automatically. It doesn't always. So just a little bit of a heads up there. If you yourselves were receiving any of those carer premiums, so maybe part of an income support claim, or maybe an income-based employment and support allowance claim, pension credit, housing benefit, council tax reduction, any of those means-tested benefits, they also will continue to have that premium included for 8 weeks following the death. Okay. Oh, let me just click that. There you go. 8 weeks following the death of that person. If you're receiving universal credit, okay, there's so many different benefits. The carer element, which is the equivalent of a premium or addition, but within this particular benefit, that can continue for the rest of the universal credit assessment period, and it will also be included for the next 2 assessment periods. So that sort of equals it out a little bit in terms of how long you're going to get this for. Now, with universal credit, and with any of the other means-tested benefits, it could be that once your entitlement to the carer's premium element or addition will impact quite significantly your continued entitlement to this benefit. So it's always worth, at that point, if not before, getting a check to make sure that you're actually not going to suddenly have a drastic stop in your income. Now, with universal credit, Let's not forget, part of the universal credit process is when you apply, you are placed in a claimant commitment group. And when you had caring responsibilities, you had no work-related activity, so there was no work searches requested from you. You didn't have any particular things to do around reporting income, because your carer's status removed you from all of that. When you lose your caring status, you will be asked to commit to a new claimant commitment with a work coach. So at that point, it's really important that you are really honest about how you're feeling and what support you may need. But I will touch into that a little bit more. We do have one slight anomaly in this. Now, it could be that if you are over 65 and you are entitled to invalid care allowance, now this is a really old name for carers allowance. You haven't been able to claim invalid care allowance since October 2002, but there are still people who are on it, who are still receiving it. So I think it's just worth mentioning that in these circumstances, if the person you care for dies and you're in receipt of invalid care allowance, this is a completely different benefit to carers allowance, it's its predecessor, then you're entitled to remain on carers allowance and retain all of these premiums, additions, and etc. for indefinitely after the person you've looked after has died. So there's a little slight anomaly in that system, but it's very rare that we would come across it now. Not impossible, but very rare. Okay, let's consider moving on. Because I focused very much on sort of benefits that were currently in payment when a bereavement happens. But there is actually a different suite of benefits that you may be entitled to. Now, these are the bereavement support payments, and they could be available to you if your partner has died on or after April 2017. So that probably is going to be the case now. And at the time of that person's death, you yourself, you were under state pension age. Okay. Things change slightly if you are over state pension age when your partner dies. Okay. If you and your partner weren't married or in a civil partnership at the time of their death, you can only claim a bereavement support payment if together you looked after a child who lived with you and your partner, or you got child benefit for this child. Okay, so if you were married, it doesn't matter whether there were children. If you weren't married, then it is considered the next step of eligibility is that there must be a child. And there's been a bit of a change to how this benefit works in the past year or so. It's been quite prominent about the different changes. So these are the changes that have come through here. So if you were married or in a civil partnership, you were under state pension age at the time of your partner's death, then you would be eligible for a bereavement support payment. If you weren't married or in a civil partnership, but you had children together and you're still getting child benefit for these children, then you would also be eligible. It is based on your late partner having paid national insurance contributions for at least 25 weeks in any one tax year, okay? All the way back from them being 16 or 18 or whenever they start to pay tax, all the way up for at least 25 weeks. Or they died because of an accident at work or a disease caused by their employment, okay? The DWP will automatically check whether you have entitlement or not. And with eligibility for this particular benefit, it doesn't take into account household income, savings, if you're working or not. So it's quite a flexible benefit. It can also be paid alongside the other benefits that you're having those 8-week run-ons. And then further into the future, it's not taken into account for any other benefits that you may have entitlement to. Give you an idea of how much it is. If you don't have children, you're under your state pension age, you can have a lump sum payment, it's £2,500, monthly payments of up to £100 for 18 months. If you have children or you're pregnant, you would get a lump sum payment of £3,500 and monthly payments of £350 for 18 months. You don't need to pay tax on any of these payments, and that includes lump sum payments as well. And those payments moving forward, they don't impact on any of the benefits that you can get at all. Okay, so I've included a link there for some further information around that, because it's probably something you want to look into at the time, not necessarily something you need to become an expert about now. There's also some other funding and benefits that there is also some other funding that you might be entitled to. So things like help towards costs for the funeral, etc. That's a different sort of category of support that might be available to you. So that's something else to be mindful of, because it's very circumstantial dependent. So there may be some extra support there, but we can help and support you with that. Okay, so there's quite a lot to think about, which is why we always encourage financial support reviews. Okay, so far I've been mentioning how changes to circumstances can impact your financial situation, but actually, if you want to check you're entitled to any extra financial support at any stage, it's really useful. Okay, I'm sure you're aware, and they are trying to make it simpler, but actually the benefit system is really complicated. So it's a really good idea just to check that you're claiming everything you're entitled to. I mentioned, for example, that the run-ons don't automatically happen. When you report a death, if you use the Tell Them Once service, it can be really efficient, but it can be a bit too efficient. So it ends claims, okay, but it doesn't take into account that actually some of these claims can continue for 8 weeks. It's not perfect, I know. So just being on top of it, or having someone to support you to make sure that you're not missing out, is really important. And not having to jump through extra hoops when it's not needed. So not having to suddenly start to look for work in 8 weeks' time, when actually there are other options available to you, based on how you're feeling at that point of time. Because everyone's circumstances are completely different, okay? Nobody experiences life in exactly the same way. So if you did want to get in touch, even when caring has come to an end, we are still able to support you with moving through to the next stages of your life. Okay. And some really common examples of things that get missed is that if you were receiving a 25% disregard on council tax because you were a carer, switching that disregard to being a sole occupant in a property is really useful, because it just maintains the status quo. So you're still getting that support. You may actually be entitled to more support depending on your wider circumstances. It just keeps everything right, and not everybody always remembers that. Which brings us to this last bit that I'm just going to remind us about here. It's actually saying how you feel, and saying how you feel is really important when you are having a significant change like this in your life. You could be used to always thinking about someone else, or actually other people, and it can be really hard to stop and think about what you would like to do now for yourself. And there's actually no right or wrong feelings or experiences here. If you've been caring for a long, long time, some people find that once they stop caring, exhaustion, both physical and emotional, can catch up with you. You can feel really unwell or run down for a little while. And I'm just going to expand that, actually, because even if you've been caring for a short period of time, these same feelings are still genuine for you to have as well. There are some really practical, let me just put this up here. There are some really practical matters that you might have to consider, and some need to be dealt with quite quickly. Things like reporting changes of circumstances, making sure that you're not missing out on any benefit payments, possible changes to your housing situation. However, there are lots of aspects in your life that you don't need to rush into making decisions. So again, on the website, there's lots of different ways that you can just think around how you can support. And if you're ready to access them, please feel free to do so. So things like, you might want to just take a little bit of time out for yourself. See what funding might be available to support you to do that. Will you need some help and support from maybe your doctor or your GP to sign you off from having to look from work? Maybe you want to spend a little bit of time getting some support from other people who have got lived experience like you. They've gone through the same thing, or maybe they've gone through the same thing and now they're there to help you go through that period. It might be that actually, with a little bit of time, you suddenly start to decide, well, do you know what? Actually, I want to do a little bit for me. Maybe you would like to branch out into volunteering. And in time, it might be that actually you want to go back into the workplace. So there's some information on the website just for you to have a little look. You don't need to consider it now. You don't need to consider it straight away. But just know that even if your caring role has ended, Carers UK is still there to support you in many different ways as well. So accessing support, because when it comes to caring and changing to caring roles and changing to situations, it can be very difficult to sometimes identify how you're thinking or feeling or what your emotions are. These can fluctuate or even change over time. You might feel resentful, you might feel angry, you might feel guilty for feeling that way. And I just want to reassure you that actually all human emotions are completely common. You could be very tearful. You could actually feel numb. Feelings and emotions are really hard to deal with. So we've got some information here that at that time, when needed, you can access extra help and support. There are lots of different organisations out there. These are some of the ones that are listed on our website. Don't be afraid to get in touch with your GP or any emotional support programs that may be available to you. And you don't have to access them straight away. You can maybe pop in, maybe pop out. You could access them in a few weeks, few months, and I know people who are actually accessing bereavement support years after that event has happened, because at that point in time where actually it would be useful and helpful to them. It can be a really difficult time. So don't be afraid to just get in touch with organisations. So Cruse Bereavement Care is one I've got on the slide there, Sue Ryder Online Bereavement Support. And don't underestimate, just reaching out to friends and family, because actually, when someone dies, it does have a huge impact on family dynamics and friendships as well. So just knowing that you're not alone can be really, really helpful.